Hello everyone, welcome back to Power for Nothing, a Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always, I'm joined by James. James, how are you doing? Are you well?
Sup Dan? Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks.
Wonderful. We have an awesome episode for today. Today, we're going to be talking about our favourite build-arounds. This is one of those episodes where we get to talk in depth about cards that we really like. It's one of the ones that we kind of look forward to recording. But before we get into that, James, from the top, what is a build-around?
Yeah, so a build-around is going to be a card which is weak in a typical deck, but if you have the right support for it in your deck, it can be really, really strong. I'm sort of going to add an extra criteria as well to that, but it tends to be sort of card which takes your picks in a specific, maybe slightly unique direction. And I think for Cube specifically, you kind of want the build-around slots. They need to not just be, oh, it's a synergy card that's good in this archetype, right? It needs to be a card which makes you do something slightly differently than all the other cards in the cube. So, for example, a card like Mox Opal, I would say, even though it's, meets the criteria of being weak in most decks, but good if you can support it, it's still not really a build-around for me in the context of cube, because basically Mox Opal just says put it in the artifact deck and not in your other decks, right? But if there's a supported artifact matter archetype in your cube, then Mox Opal is going to be good in any deck you draft in that archetype, right? It's not making you pick cards very differently compared to any of your other artifact matter cards. Whereas contrast that, for example, cards like Oath of Druids, which I would say is definitely a build-around, which that makes you prioritize all the cards in your deck a little bit differently compared to if you were not building around the Oath, right? And it's pretty unique in the choices it forces you to take in your picks, right? It really warps your pick order. And I think to have like a really interesting build-around slot, that's kind of what I want. I think often a good test of is a card really a build-around for Cube is, do you like name your deck after it, right? If you drafted Oath of Druids deck and someone's like, what do you draft? I'm like, oh, I drafted a really cool Oath of Druids deck. No one's ever like, oh, I drafted a really cool Lightning Bolt deck. And no one's really like, oh, I drafted a cool Mox Opal deck, right? You just drafted the artifact deck. But yeah, so I think the cards which take your draft in a really unique direction are the ones I want to have in those build-around slots in Cube generally.
No, definitely. Build-arounds are some of my favorite types of Magic cards. So they're kind of ones that, like, you kind of alluded to it, but they kind of warp the way that you like draft and build your deck. It's kind of like, effectively, you see a cool card that is, as you kind of mentioned, like, it can be very powerful, but it does require effort to pull off. But for me, I like that kind of challenge of like, ooh, today we are doing this flavor of deck. It kind of like, it can be a simple thing of just like one card's inclusion in a cube can make a whole new deck exist. And as a cube designer and as someone who plays a lot of cube, that's really exciting and interesting because it can make a whole new deck exist just by the existence of one card. And that's really, really cool. But awesome. This is probably going to be the first in a series of these because there's a lot of very cool build-arounds. We could be talking about them for hours. So these are not what we would describe as like the best. This is not like a tier list. This is not like these are all S tier or these are 10 out of 10s or here is like a ranking. These are ones that we think are cool. We will talk about kind of like the power level of cubes they can go into. We will try and touch on different power level of cubes as we do these episodes, that kind of stuff, because some are right fits for high power level cubes. Some are like pauper cubes. Some are peasant cubes. We have notes for a bunch of different ones. We'll see how many we can get to today, but we will come back to this in the future because it's us waxing lyrical about cool things, and that's kind of the point of having a podcast, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, for sure. This is a somewhat indulgent episode, I think, but hopefully gives you fun ideas for your own cubes as well.
Our last one was the news, and we have a set review coming up. So we get this one, okay? We get one. This one's for us. But yeah, let's touch on our first card of the day, James. Do you want to read us Birthing Pod?
I would love to read Birthing Pod. Birthing Pod is such a banger. It's a really fun card to play, I think. So Birthing Pod is 3 and a Phyrexian green mana, so you can pay 3 generic mana and 2 life, or you can pay 3 and a green for a artifact. And you can tap the artifact, pay 1 and another green Phyrexian, and sacrifice a creature. So search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice creature's mana value. Put that card onto the battlefield and then shuffle. So you can pay a mana and 2 life, sack your 3-drop, go and get any 4-drop from your deck. Then next turn, if this is still around, you could sack the 4-drop, go and get the 5-drop, or you could sacrifice a different creature. And I think one of the really cool things about Birthing Pod is it lets you play with your whole deck as if your whole deck was part of your hand, right? I think it's really Magic is it's a very different experience when you're getting to play with your whole deck versus just the cards you happen to draw off the top, right? Like this is why some of the Storm decks with all the tutors are really fun. Is that you get to it's a puzzle you need to solve of how you can piece together victory from the cards and with access to all the cards in your deck. And Birthing Pod also gives you that experience without having to put a million tutors into your cube. And it's restrictive enough that it really makes you do a lot of work here. Because the thing is, right, you can't just be... I played a generically okay 3-drop. Like, I don't know, I played a Leovold, say, and then I sacrificed my Leovold to get my Questing Beast, and then I sacrificed my Questing Beast to go and get my Elder Gargaroth, say. Like, these are all fine Magic cards. But Birthing Pod in that scenario cost you, say, 3 mana and 2 life, and then you used it 2 more times. So all in, you're in for 5 mana and 6 life. And then at that point, all you've achieved is upgrading your 3-drop into your 5-drop. That was not a good use of your time and resources there to play the Birthing Pod. You'd have been much better off just playing another generically powerful card. So what you need to make it so Birthing Pod is worth the time and resources is creatures where they don't need to remain on the battlefield to get their value. So, for example, if the value is in the form of an enters the battlefield effect, so you say you cast your Elvish Visionary, the 1 green 1/1 that draws a card, and then you pod that away and you get your 3-drop, well, you weren't really losing the value of the Elvish Visionary when you sacked it, right? And then your 3-drop can have an enter the battlefield ability, and then you pod that away into a 4-drop, and at every stage in this chain, you're accumulating value. And you're eventually just going to drown your opponent in a never-ending tide of 2-for-1s. Similarly, if your creatures have death abilities, so they draw a card when they die, or they come back when they die, think like persist creatures, those are really excellent with Birthing Pod. Also, finally, creatures with a higher mana value than what you actually paid for them. So think, for example, a Narcomoeba that came into play for free. You can then pod that into a 3-drop, even though you didn't have to actually pay 3 mana for it. If you wanted to be really ambitious, you could play Gurmag Anglers and then pod it away into something huge. That's cool.
Oh yes.
But the other very nice thing about this, because it's not it's not just get any 4-drop from your deck; it's get the specific one you want. So this can also be really powerful for setting up combos. Obviously, creature combos where all the different parts are creatures, you can then tutor for all of the parts of your combo. That's really powerful. So I think sort of the natural things to set up here is stuff like Persist combo. That's great because the Persist creatures have natural synergy with Birthing Pod, as we discussed. But also some stuff like Kiki-Jiki with like Resto Angel is cool. As a thing you can pod into, but I mean, there's lots of creature combos. You don't need to be to list all of them. Stuff like Chatterfang type things, Warren Soul Trader, all the aristocracy stuff. There's a lot of potential here. You can do a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, just something I want to touch on that. Yeah, I know it is a fair bit of play in some in Cube and some other formats in the past, like with the creature combos, like with things like Deceiver Exarch, because you can also untap your pod. It doesn't just untap the Kiki-Jiki, you can also untap the pod as well, which is quite hot. When we've seen this in other formats, James, there was an element of like the untappers were a big thing, like for the more all-in like pod decks, but that's not really how it looked in Cube because, well, in Constructed you would have 4 pods, you were going to see it, whereas kind of like in Cube, it's more the value aspect with pod rather than going up my 2-drop untaps my pod, which gets my 3-drop that untaps my pod, that gets my 4-drop untaps my pod, and then I end with a Grizzlebrand or something like that. Is that fair?
Yeah, you're just never going to have the whole chain in your deck. The other thing is, even if your whole deck comes together and you have the perfect chain, you then put a whole bunch of really suboptimal cards in your deck. You've got 4 bad creatures in your chain that just untap Birthing Pod. And you're 4 times more likely to draw one of those bad creatures than you are to actually draw the Birthing Pod. So yeah, it's not great. All your creatures kind of have to be, not necessarily justify themselves on their own, but at least respectable, when you don't draw the pod. And, if you're setting up combos, you can also just draw into the combo, right? It's not like you're only allowed to find it with Birthing Pod. But yeah, in the right setup, the pod just adds so much consistency to your draws, But the other thing that makes it tricky, right, is you really want to be able to access all points on the chain from most of the creatures, given enough time. So you can't really have gaps, right? You can't just have like, I've got good 2s and 3s and then a couple of great 5s, but I don't really have 4s. That's a problem because then you have no way to get to the 5s. And really, you want multiples at each step, right? Because you don't want to be like, oh, I drew my only 4-drop and then it's already died or whatever. So I then can't access the more expensive cards. So you do need sort of quite it really makes you think about what have I got at each stage? What are my chains going to look like? And I think that's quite cool.
Yeah. To me, that's what makes this a proper build around, is that you really have to think about you have to have multiples in the curve. Like I've seen pod players in Cube, like you can normally tell who is the pod player because they're the player who has like their curve face down in front of them.
Yeah, honestly, pod is a lot weaker if you're strictly enforcing draft rules where you're not allowed to look at your pile between packs. It makes it much more challenging.
Yeah, no, definitely. Are there any other challenges with pod, James?
Yes, certainly. Pod is great because it gives you value and it gives you consistency, but it does not give you speed. Pod is a really slow card, and on top of all of it, as well as just being slow and not affecting the board that much, it is also costing you a bunch of life. Because most of the time, right, you're not going to have the mana to pay you're going to be paying life a lot of the time. And a lot of cubes are just too quick, and you're not allowed to do this anymore, sadly. I think the days of pod being a card for like high power level cubes are kind of gone, but in more mid-power level cubes, you just have to be conscious of that with the rest of your deck building choices, right? So you need creatures that give you defensive speed. Stuff like Wall of Omens is really nice here, right? It's giving you the card on the way in, but it's also giving you a nice blocker to sit behind that's going to save you some life points so that you have a little bit more time to sit around and play with your Birthing Pod as well. We mostly just need to have creatures that interact at various points in the train. Stuff like a Ravenous Chupacabra, for example, is very nice here, right? You're dying to some big scary dragon, you pod away your 3-drop into a Ravenous Chupacabra, that fixes the issue, and then next turn you can like pod away your Chupacabra into a 5.
Yeah. It is one of the best just like value cards, but like value cards do exist in certain cubes. They don't, like in the more higher power level cubes, in the more streamlined cubes, we don't have time to just accrue value. We need to be doing something. We need to be trying to kill our opponent. And kind of like this is a card for more slower cubes. I think kind of like to really kind of like highlight this. Like when this card was banned in Modern, I believe in the article when it was banned, they mentioned specifically Siege Rhino being too good with pod, and kind of like that. I think is the power level of cube we are where Birthing Pod like can really shine. Is like if Siege Rhino is a respectable creature, And like those cubes will exist, and those cubes are a lot of fun. Like they aren't the most powerful. They are generally more budget cubes, and like because this card is somehow still banned in Modern, it's not the most expensive card. It's around like the $10 mark. You can probably get a battered one a bit cheaper, like, and that's more because it hasn't been reprinted because it hasn't seen as much play because it's not Modern legal anymore. But yeah, Birthing Pod is a banger of a card, and it is something that you can support in Cube. It is also nice. Unlike a lot of the other build runs we're going to be talking about today, there is a little bit of redundancy. They're all worse, but like Prime Speaker Vanifar does a good impression of Birthing Pod. You can't do it the turn you play it because it's a creature. And then Vivian on the Hunt is a 6-mana Planeswalker that does the Birthing Pod thing as its +2. So there is some redundancy there. So like if you want that value deck to exist, you can probably make like I'm going to say Bant. That's kind of actually like a Bant ETB Flicker style of deck where you're using these. That could be quite nice. That's probably something that could still exist in 2025 in plenty of budget cubes, because yeah, Birthing Pod about a tenner, but the other two I've mentioned are like Vivian of the Hunt. Vivian of the Hunt is like sub 50p, so something to consider.
Yeah, for sure. I like it a lot more if Cube has combos, and there's a few little creature combos which are uniquely good with Pod. Like Karmic Guide is really good to Pod into. Like Pod away my Chupacabra, get my Karmic Guide, that gets back Chupacabra. Like, your opponent's dead. You're having a great time, you know? And it's, I think it's just such a fun, like, play and draft experience.
Yeah, Birthing Pod is an all-time classic. It's a card I want to play with, and that's the definition of a build around. The next one, I think, should be a clue to everyone that James put together these show notes. Our next card, James, is Opposition. Talk to us about Opposition, James.
Opposition's so sick. Opposition's so sick. All the haters are all wrong. So Opposition is 2 blue for an enchantment, and you can tap a creature you control to tap target permanent. You can do this at instant speed. There's no mana involved, none of that nonsense. Opposition is really good. So the reason Opposition is really good, right, is that it's good at a lot of different stages of the game, and you don't need a lot of creatures for it to be good. When you have Opposition with 1 or 2 creatures in play, it's just really hard for your opponent to kill you because you just tap down their good thing every turn, and that's fine. That you're probably still taking a little bit of damage, but it's buying you the time to find more creatures. Once you've found more creatures, you can then assemble your lock and lock down the whole board. And once you've really gone wide with a bunch of tokens and whatnot, then you're into the stage where you're tapping down their lands in their upkeep, and they're pretty much locked out of the game. And it's that you're gradually assembling that lock, right? You're starting from I'm just not tapping down your attacker, keeping myself alive, into a few turns later, cool, you're not casting sorcery speed spells for the remainder of this game. And I think that's sick. You do need to do a little bit of work to enable it, though, because if you want to be going wide, you need a lot of creatures in play to really get full value. And you also need them to be creatures that don't need to attack or block to get their value. So yeah, obviously like token makers are a big thing here, but also just like that cheap value creatures. Again, we mentioned it with both of our stuff like the Spirited Companions, things like the even like Deep Cavern Bat, that sort of thing. Right? It's got its value just on the way in, and just by sitting there, you don't need it to be attacking, so it can sit around, generate you value by tapping to an Opposition. And then you're generally playing a like slower, more value-y game, and you're building up your lock, and then you just have this sort of inevitability into the late game.
Nice. No, I would not say I'm an Opposition hater. I am just more, I'm saying, realistic with its power level. I think it's very strong, and I think if you can build around it, it is very good. I'm going to say the word smokestacky In terms of power level, I think
it's so much better than Smokestack. It's so much better.
It's like it is the fact that I think for me the fact it's a blue card makes it a bit trickier. Because blue generally in Cube isn't really the color of tokens. Yeah, so like where this has been really good is like where it's seen like combination play with a card like Whirler Rogue. That's a 4-mana 2/2 that makes 2 Thopter tokens. So that's like a board state in a can, which kind of like blue doesn't get too much, but kind of like I guess it is kind of touching that artifact deck. So maybe like this with like Psy, that also splits out a bunch of Thopters could be quite good as well. Like then you are a bit more control-y until you kind of find your big piece to actually get around to actually kind of beat them with. But yeah, like tapping down their lands, I think is by far the strongest part of this card, because like if you can be just nerfing them on mana, then that is incredibly strong. Like that's like for me, that is the part where it makes sense in powered cube. Like tapping down their creatures is like, okay, cool. They haven't attacked you for a turn. That's okay. But like for me, like when you're controlling the game and actually like nerfing them out of mana so they can't actually do anything, that's when I think opposition is at its strongest. And I just think with all these, they are build arounds. You need to find ways of building around them. So if you can do that, then I think then I'm here for opposition, James. I will defend you.
Glad to hear it. Yeah, so I think you're right that you want to have a way to get to that lock state in the end, right? Where you're tapping all their lands and they never have an untapped permanent in their first main phase. But it's nice that it does something before you get there, you know? Mm-hmm. It's not all of nothing. I like that it gives you a bit of the time you need to get there to play your more expensive cards that make you more tokens, right? But yeah, you're right. You do need to put in some work. I think color combo wise, sort of the classic is blue-green, right? Where you play like some elves and your opposition, and then you are ramping in something like the Deep Forest Hermit or whatever.
Yeah, deranged Hermit.
Yeah. That
was the classic one, yeah.
Yeah. I actually think there's a bunch of color combinations that work really well here. Esper is one I've really liked in the past. So you get those like nice little dinky value creatures, your like Mesmeric Fiends type stuff, your Spirited Companions, and then you obviously like Lingering Souls is just the whole world. And yeah, and white just has a decent amount of token makers, right? But yeah, no, I think it's cool, and I kind of think it can still hang. I think for me, the big difference between this and something like Smokestack that you mentioned, right, is this doesn't care about... The issue with Smokestack, right, is when your opponent has a bunch of disposable stuff that they can sack. And it's a Punisher effect, right? They get to choose what they're sacking. With this, you get to choose what you're... Right?
That's true. You get to pick their 4/4 rather than their 1/1, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And even when you're tapping their lands down, if they've drawn, say, 4 islands and 1 plains, you can tap down the plane and get them off of white mana that way.
That's very true, yeah.
And the other thing, right, is that Smokestack, it takes some time to build up the soot counters or whatever they're called. Whereas opposition, if you've got the board state and you draw the opposition, there's no window for them to keep playing the game for a bit while it gets going, you know?
No, that's fair. And for me, I guess the biggest part of opposition is it is such a unique effect. Like for me, it is again, another great definition of the term build round, because just it existing, without this effect is so unique. There's nothing else that does this. It just existing means that the opposition deck now exists. So for me, I think that's one reason why it still sees play in a wide variety of cubes, including the higher power level ones and all the way down to the budget ones, because it just being there facilitates a whole archetype and deck existing. And that is a fantastic thing to have in a cube. It just one card makes a whole nother deck exist. It's a whole archetype. It's a whole package in a single card. And that's, I think, yeah, that alone means that it should be considered outside of where people lie on the power level scales.
Yeah, for sure. And you're getting a lot more impact out of one card slot than if it was just another reasonable creature. And it's why I'm kind of fine including these cards, even if a bunch of the time they don't get played, right? Because like I'm okay if 4 times out of 5 the opposition ends up in someone's sideboard. If the other 1 time someone's like, oh, I drafted a sick opposition deck, like I'm kind of more in for that trade-off than putting in, I don't know, say a Tishana's Tidebinder, just looking at a cube list. Like, yeah, it's a fine card. People will put it in their decks, but you're not adding like a new experience to your cube by putting a Tishana's Tidebinder in it, right? Obviously, you can't have all build-arounds. You need most of your cards to be functional, standalone Magic cards and role players and supporting your larger archetypes. But I think it's really cool to find space for a few of these cards.
No, fantastic. All right, let's move on to another build-around. Next up, we have Oath of Druids. And of all the ones we mentioned so far, this is a card that if I see in my opening pack, like that is what I'm doing for that day. Like I am taking Oath of Druids and I'm going to have a fantastic time because it is a very strong card and a very good build around. You've read the last couple, James. I'll read Oath of Druids. It's a bit of a long one. Oath of Druids is 1 green for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player chooses target player who controls more creatures than they do and is their opponent. The first player may reveal cards on the top of their library until they reveal a creature card. If that player does, that player puts that card onto the battlefield and all other cards revealed this way into their graveyard. So, James, talk to us about Oath of Druids. What is the game plan here? How are we getting the most out of this very broken enchantment?
So, the sort of the happy path of your Oath of Druids games where everything goes well, the game plan is that your opponent plays some nice 2-drop creature. You say, that's cute. You play an Oath of Druids. On your next turn, your Oath of Druids is going to trigger, and you're going to put a very large creature into play a long time ahead of the curve, and the game is going to snowball from there. You will probably in your Oath of Druids deck not have very many creatures. You'll certainly have far fewer than your opponent, so you may even get multiple Oath triggers. But in reality, it's probably not going to matter because the thing if your opponent gets an Oath trigger at some point later in the game because you're running away with the game so quickly because you put an 8-drop into play on turn 3. So to enable that to work, you're putting quite a lot of restrictions on your deck. Generally in our decks, we want to have a curve of creatures with more creatures at the cheaper end of that curve and only a few expensive creatures. We end up hitting a cheap creature off our Oath trigger, then obviously we're a bit sad about that. So ideally in your Oath of Druids deck, you probably want somewhere in the region of 3 to 5 creatures. You want enough because you've got to bear in mind that the cards you hit before you hit your creature are going to go to your graveyard. They're not going on the bottom of your library. So if you have too few creatures, you can deck yourself. It's an issue. I've seen it happen to you, Dan.
Yeah, just oathing into that Atraxa at the bottom of the deck is like, ooh, that's what are we drawing? Not enough. Okay,
yeah. So you want a decent chunk, and you want them all to be fairly high impact, right? You don't want any whiffs. Is kind of the important thing.
No, I'd agree. Yeah, Oath is a really cool one. Part of the tricky parts with Oath is building a deck where you just don't die, because again, you're a deck with 3 to 5 creatures in it. It's like 3 to 5 very impactful creatures, but still 3 to 5 creatures. Like if you don't see them or you don't see the Oath, you can just I'm not even saying an aggro deck, just like a regular mid-range deck that at some point puts a 5 power creature into play could cause you issues. So I'm assuming with the deck we're looking for quite a lot of card selection. And are we also generally combining this with another way of cheating something into play, would you say?
Ideally, yes, because you don't want to put your 4 Oath of Druids targets in your deck and have nothing else to do with them. So ideally, you want this in a cube where there's other stuff to do with giant creatures. Think Flash, think Sneak Attack, think Through the Breach, think Reanimates. All this stuff can work. But you don't, you don't want them to just be dead draws waiting to draw your right. And And yeah, the other challenges as well, right? You're a deck with no green. It's not just for your deck with no cheap creatures. You're a green deck with no cheap creatures.
That's kind of what
Like,
green does.
yeah, that bit can be a bit tough. Oath of Druids will very frequently be the only green cards in your deck. But I will say, I think there is a little bit more flexibility than sometimes people realize about which creatures you put in. They don't have to all be 8 drops, you know? As long as your deck is like reliably going to have fewer creatures in play than most of your opponents, and all of the creatures high impact when you hit them, it's okay to have maybe 1 or 2 cheaper ones, if that makes your deck as a whole better. So, for example, say you've drafted a Sultai Oath deck and you got a Psychic Frog. It's totally fine to put Psychic Frog in your deck. Sometimes you'll Oath into Psychic Frog, and the Psychic Frog will be pretty good because Psychic Frog is kind of a messed up card. Would it have been better if you hit your Archon of Cruelty instead? Sure, but the Psychic Frog is going to be a lot better than the Archon in your opening hand, so maybe that's a trade-off you're willing to make. You just need to be careful you don't have any proper misses. Yeah, Oath of Druids into Psychic Frog is okay. Oath of Druids into Elvish Mystic is not okay. You need to avoid.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think that's very fair. You also, how is Oath of Druids like in a combo deck though? Like, it does seem like, how do we feel about if the only creatures in our deck are like our Kiki Jiki and our Deceiver Exarch? It's like, does that work well, or does it depend on the combos that we're hitting?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I generally don't love the idea of I have my Oath of Druids in play. I get a trigger. I hit a creature. That creature doesn't do that much on its own. But then when I get my second trigger, those 2 creatures win the game together. That seems like a plan our opponent might be able to interact with, you know? Especially because by necessity, we didn't play any other creatures this game. So they are sat there looking at their removal spell, right? But you certainly can use this to enable a combo deck, because you're deterministically hitting one of a small subset of creatures, right? And that enables you to really build your deck around those creatures. So, for example, one thing that can come up is, say you have a Wheels deck. You can play an Oath of Druids with your hits being like a Hull Breacher, a Leovold, and a Shieldred. And then the really nice bonus you get from that is if you have Echo of Eons, whenever you mill over the Echo of Eons, you oathed basically into your wheel and your payoff. So that's really powerful. And then when you cast that Echo, you then like shuffle in any creatures that died earlier. You can keep going. That's really cool. You can also do interesting things like my only creature in my deck is an Eternal Witness.
Okay, yeah.
Then obviously when I oath, I'm hoping my Eternal Witness is the lowest card in my library. So then I have access to my whole graveyard, my Ewit trigger, and I can progress my game from there. That stuff's always like, it's really cool when you can pull it off, but I can't in good conscience recommend most people start the draft aiming to do that.
Yeah, things have happened to get to that point, James. That is not I've opened this Oath of Druids. Like, the first response is not the only creature I'm going to draft is Eternal Witness. That is somehow you have Reanimator to your right and Flash to your left, and you do not see a big creature all day, basically. That's the only way that happens.
Or, like, I'm a blue-green draw 70 Stormy deck, and I happen to see an Oath of Druids and then an Eternal Witness, right?
Yeah, no, that is fair. Another way that I've seen Oath of Druids decks be taken quite a bit is often with a quite high Planeswalker count. Because Planeswalkers obviously don't count. Like, some Planeswalkers make creatures, but some of them are just value engine. Like Oath of Druids and an amount of Teferis seems like quite a good way of controlling the board and just slowing things down until you can pop off with your Oath of Druids, basically. That seems pretty solid to me. Yeah,
for sure. And it gives you a threat that you can play and proactively progress the game when you don't draw your Oath of Druids, right? It's taking the role of a creature. particular shout out as well for Oko Thief of Crowns. Not that it needs to help, but Oko can give your opponent a creature.
That's quite funny. Yeah, I like that.
It is an issue that Oath decks run into, that some amount of the time you play against a control or a combo deck and they just don't put creatures into play.
Or a reanimator deck. It's like the one creature they put in is Archon or something like that. Yeah. It's bigger than your one creature, yeah.
Another thing to say on that point, though, if you're against just like a normal mid-range deck, I would generally recommend not playing the Oath onto an empty board.
Wait for them to have something, basically.
Exactly.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Because the thing is, if you play it onto the empty board, you're giving them the opportunity to hang around and find a way to remove the Oath before they cast their creatures, right? Whereas if you let them cast a creature, then you play the Oath. If they think the Oath is really good in your deck, one pattern you'll see there a lot is, okay, I'll attack you with my creature, and then I will use my Doomblade and kill my own creature. And that's a really good pattern for you, right? If they're forced to do that. So you can, even if they can maybe find a way to deny you the trigger, you can get a ton of value off it. And a bunch of the time, they just won't be able to get a creature out of play, and you're just going to Oath into your thing and end the game.
Yeah, Oath is a really cool card. We do love it. All right, we're changing things up a bit. We have our first creature that is a build round to talk about. Next up, we're going to talk about Lurrus of the Dream Den. So this is one of the famously fair and fixed companions. Lurrus of the Dream Den is one hybrid Orzhov for a 3/2 legendary creature Cat Nightmare with lifelink, and during each of your turns, you may cast one permanent spell with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. But it also has Companion, which means there is a deck building clause that you have to follow in order to be able to have Lurrus as the companion. Its drawback is each permanent card in your starting deck has mana value 2 or less. And as a reminder for Companion, it means that it starts in the Companion zone, maybe, outside the game. And at any point, you can pay 3 mana at sorcery speed. So not at any point. You can spend 3 mana at sorcery speed to move it from the command zone. Let's try that one into your hand. That has been updated. Originally, there was no cost. You could just do it at sorcery speed. But Lurrus is a very, very strong magic card. Like, it's just such an annoying little value engine. James, talk to us about Lurrus of the Dream Den. Like, what's the play pattern with Lurrus, and why is it really good?
Yeah, Lurrus is really powerful. Like, you start with 8 cards. That's kind of messed up. And one of those cards is a really powerful 3 mana play that you can build around, and that is going to provide you ongoing card advantage throughout the game. And because you have access to it every single game, you can really lean into it. Having said that, it takes a ton of mana, right? You're 6 mana deep by the time Lurrus has hit the battlefield. It's therefore not an early game play. It's not acceptable in almost any game of a cube that is powerful enough you'll put Lurrus in it to spend turn 3 putting Lurrus into your hand and turn 4 casting it. It's generally going to be a later game thing. How I like to approach drafting Lurrus decks, and this isn't the only way to draft them, but how I like to approach it in more sort of high power level cubes is that basically I'm building my decks just 1-for-1 with my opponent as much as possible. Right? I have a bunch of removal, I have a bunch of discard spells, I have a bunch of counter spells, whatever it might be. I'm just going to exchange resources with my opponent, draw the game out. We're going to both be empty-handed. Then I'm going to spend 3 mana to put Lurrus into my hand. Then I'm going to cast Lurrus, return 2-drop, and that's just such a huge advantage that I basically didn't pay very much for, And the condition, yes, you need to draft around it, and yes, you will pass good cards, but putting cheap cards in your deck is not a huge cost.
Yeah.
You should put cheap cards in your deck anyway. Cheap cards are very good.
It's a deck building constraint, but it's also just good advice.
Yeah.
And also importantly, it is only permanent spells. So your instants and your sorceries can be more expensive. So that is something good to consider. I've also found that Lurrus is very good if you have effects that sack themselves for value. So, like in my cube, things like Pyrite Spellbomb, Seal of Fire are really good removal spells that get really quite egregious with Lurrus because you just kind of keep bringing back the removal spell and keep doming your opponent's creatures. Like stuff like the Baubles are very good for card draw. And then obviously in the most powerful cubes, like, I mean, Lurrus, like Black Lotus seems pretty strong, James.
Yeah, it's not very reasonable.
Yeah.
Lost to that in enough games of Vintage recently.
No, exactly. And like the thing for me that really pushes a Lurrus deck over the edge, like especially like I felt this more as someone who's played against it in Cube a bunch, is when they have the recursion spell for the Lurrus, because there is kind of this like when they reveal the Lurrus in the first place, you're already keeping a removal spell up for it because you're like, okay, if I answer the Lurrus, then in theory that whole deck falls apart. That's not really normally how it works, but kind of like in my head, it's like, okay, they've spoiled me their game plan. All I have to do is draw a removal spell and then I'll kill it. The deck normally doesn't fold, but like it is a big part of it. Like if you can answer the Lurrus, it will affect the Lurrus deck because they have built the whole deck around it. But that's where cards like Unearth or Animate Dead are really good because you can just rebuy the Lurrus. And then your opponent just keeps getting more value again and again. It's very strong. Yeah, have you found that to be the case with Lurrus, James?
Yeah, for sure. There's some Lurrus decks where it almost feels like it's a commander rather than a companion. You keep killing it, and every turn it just comes back.
Yeah.
And yeah, and when your deck's really built around, it's just always getting you a card the turn you cast it. So it's kind of inherently a 2-for-1 in that sense, but it's also almost a 2-for-0, I guess, because you didn't even have to draw it. It's in the companion zone, and and you can just keep getting that value, and you're not really paying a big cost to put these cards in your deck, but work well with the Lurrus because you just always have access to Lurrus, right? There's never a game where you draw your enabler but don't draw your payoff because your payoff is in the companion zone. The way to punish them is make the game about tempo, not about value, because then it punishes them for needing to spend that 3 mana to put it into their hand and not affect the board. But yeah, no, I find Lurrus decks are really strong in high power level cubes. I think they play really well if you draft around them. Also worth saying, this sort of attritional decks isn't the only thing you can do with it. It can also be redundancy for some combo decks, like specifically the Underworld Breach Storm deck.
Okay.
Because it's completely free in that deck, right? There's like no permanents you would put in the deck, really. Maybe like a One Ring if you saw it, but that deck doesn't need permanents. And getting to buy back your Breach if they deal with your Breach is kind of huge. That's quite nice. And you can draft like kind of any colors you like with it. Because it's hybrid as well, you don't even be both white and black.
Yeah.
But I've often found you can be quite a few colors with Lurrus. I'd say green is sort of the least naturally synergistic because green is obviously about making more mana and casting more expensive things, which are often permanents. I like the card Malevolent Rumble specifically a lot with Lurrus, but outside of that, I don't tend to be green in a lot of my Lurrus decks. But all the other colors play really well with Lurrus.
No, I think that's it. The one thing I do want to make people aware of, just from what I've seen and my experience of playing with Lurrus, is that Lurrus is very strong. If you see it in pack 1, as in fact most of these build arounds are, they are stronger the earlier you get them. But there is definitely I have seen multiple people in our cube go for Lurrus like in like pack 2 and really struggle to hit playables, because it's fine once you have a whole cube to build around it, but there are definitely worlds where you didn't know you were going to get the Lurrus, so you will have been taking 3 drops and 4 drops and that kind of stuff. Like, to commit to Lurrus, you are like sometimes you are putting a decent part of your potential pool to one side. A lot of the time it can be worth it, but you have to keep that in mind of like if you take a Lurrus, just count how many playable cards you have at that point Actually, maybe do that before you take the Lurrus, actually, and then work out how much of the rest of the draft you have to finish off the deck and bring everything together. It's just one thing to consider with a Lurrus pile, basically.
Yeah, for sure, because you're not just giving up the cards you've already drafted that don't meet the criteria. You're giving up future powerful cards you'll see, which are ruled out by Lurrus. And you will have packs, right, where, especially if you're, for example, a 2-color Lurrus deck, and your blue-black and the 2 blue cards and the black cards in the pack are all disqualified by Lurrus, and you're just not getting anything out of that pack, and that sucks, right? It can mean that you have packs even when your colors are quite open, where you're just not getting a card for your deck. I think that's why Lurrus decks are quite often 3 or more colors, because it just reduces those number of packs which are going to be blanks for you.
No, that definitely makes sense. One last thing to touch on with Lurrus is if you are playing it in paper, you do have the option to errata things. Like in my cube, we do play with original companion rules, so you don't have to pay the 3. Mine isn't a powered cube, and Lurrus does kind of push that to the limit. Like the other ones are fine in that environment, but Lurrus is at the tippy-toppy of maybe I need to rethink of that. But if you are in full powered vintage cube, like I think you could play with these as written, because it's an environment where everything is broken. Again, if you're listening to this and you have a cube, it's your cube. Have a think about it. It's your decision. Like James, from your experience, Lurrus has gone up. Like, how much more powerful is Lurrus when you don't have to pay the companion tax?
Oh, it's a different ball game. It's one of the more broken things you can do when you don't have to pay the tax. Yeah, it's kind of absurd. Just because that criteria is very achievable, and you just have a card you would put in your deck at a rate you would put it in your deck, but just starts in your opening hand. You know, it's like all of your opponents have already mulliganed.
Yeah,
you know, you're just already a card up when the game starts. It's kind of absurd. I think it can be cool to play with those rules, but it does take it to a whole different power level. And I think I think Lurrus is like the argument to play with the tax, and sometimes it's a shame because like the other ones sometimes get kind of killed by the tax. Like things like Zerdo are like, yeah, you really had to put in work to make Zerdo work. I feel like you shouldn't have to pay the tax, you know, but Lurrus is very, very strong if you don't pay the tax.
No, yeah, it's very, yeah, definitely. It's something I think from a balancing point of view I might have to look at some point soon.
Yeah, seems reasonable.
All right, I think that's where we're going to do it for today. There's plenty of cards I didn't have time for today, so we will be revisiting this at some point in the future. Don't you worry. James, thank you for that. That was awesome. Always good to talk about some awesome cards. Always awesome to talk about some cool cards.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Nice one. All right, thank you all very much for listening. Do make sure to give the podcast a 5-star review, give us a thumbs up, tell a friend, all that good stuff. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.